They need to understand why we're not making a huge difference in the culture right now. And the reason is it's very simple. It's because we just don't study how culture works. We don't understand, therefore, how to make a difference in the culture and to change the culture. And we continue to just accept what's handed to us as it comes to the methods that we're supposed to engage with culture. And that's called the culture war. Hey guys, this is Jon Croft with Culture Warfare with Jon Croft, and I'm Jon Croft. How's everybody doing tonight? And how are you, Rebecca?
I'm doing great. How are you, John?
Doing good. If you haven't been able to tell yet, we're on a new recording platform called Riverside. This is not an advertisement for them. I'm just trying out this other platform for the podcast, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but hopefully it'll help us expand and go live easier in the future, but also to edit more quickly. And we're recording this a little earlier than normal because of the Halloween holiday this weekend coming up. And our kids can't wait. They get to have candy where they barely ever get candy throughout the year. So it's the time of the year one of the only times of the year we ever let them have candy. So that's why I'm okay with it. I'm like, this is fine. They already know it's not healthy for them, so
Yeah.
it's just a fun thing.
Yeah, we enjoy the costumes and walking in the neighborhoods.
So we'll see if this recording goes well. I am concerned about it. I'm kind of like, under the surface, I'm like, oh, I don't know if this is gonna work. But it's because it's a brand new thing. So once we get used to it, it probably won't be a big deal. Yeah, Halloween's coming up. We have a lot of things happening, but right now for cultural warfare, we're going to talk about some standard things, some stuff we've talked about in the past, but we're going to talk about it with a little more depth. And that is film movements, in particular the French New Wave. There's a reason I want to talk about the French New Wave. So many people might think this is so boring, so academic, so silly. Why would we talk about the French New Wave, right? Which was happening in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Well, it's very simple. Like you're here probably because you care about conservative or Christian culture. And one of the things that, people haven't realized is that we've done barely nothing to solve this problem currently. I've formulated a whole group of theories about how culture works and how we can right now get our little fingers in the culture pie and make a difference, right? Sure, not a lot of people, we definitely have some great people watching and paying attention, but we don't have a lot of people yet. If you wouldn't mind sharing it with somebody, I'd really appreciate it. But we need more conservatives and Christians on this bandwagon because they need to understand why we're not making a huge difference in the culture right now. And the reason is it's very simple. It's because we just don't study how culture works. We don't understand, therefore, how to make a difference in the culture and to change the culture. And we continue to just accept what's handed to us as it comes to the methods that we're supposed to engage with culture. And that's called the culture war. So people hand us the way you're supposed to engage with culture, which is called culture war, and we just accept it. So if you didn't know by now, the title for this whole show is kind of ironic and meant to be a little bit funny because what we do is not culture war stuff. What we do is we demystify that term and we try to help you understand that we can actually have a real impact in the culture where the culture war will not have an impact in the real culture. A lot of people don't understand that. So we're here to kind of demystify some of that for you and to understand how to actually have an impact in the culture. And just like with politics, just like with any other subject, right? What you do is you study history, the history of things to understand how it's worked in the past. And then you kind of like understand now how things have changed. And then you kind of synthesize an answer to this problem. I'm not talking about a dialectic really. I'm talking about more like scientific method type stuff. How to actually not just talk about these things, but actually make a difference in the culture. So one of those things is understanding, first of all, film is probably the most influential and powerful artistic medium to influence the culture currently. And a lot of the reason that new forms of art haven't subsumed film is because film is still the most artistically vital and complex form of art. The newer ones haven't really subsumed it because what they've primarily not been is not community driven artistic tools, such as gaming. Gaming is definitely, I'm not saying gaming is not artistically vital or influential, but it's happening in small communities online, right? That's how that works. But that's not necessarily influencing the culture at large, right? But there still exists places, magazines, media, theaters, places to meet, have events, places to talk about culture. And the primary artistic medium for that is film. We want to include others in the future, and I do include gaming in that, and there's other forms of art as well. But I focus on film because I was a filmmaker for 15 years, and I feel like I understand it enough to talk about it in this way. And in addition, I know a lot of the history of film. And so in understanding that, we can understand how film movements occur. We can understand that we can also do the same thing today. Make a new film movement, right? Purposefully, even. But the idea is to kind of understand why film movements happen and then provide a kind of product in order to create that film movement. So, in other words, it's just all about understanding film movements and understanding that what film movements do is they provide a solution to a problem. And the French New Wave did that very directly, right? Italian neorealism was a great film movement, but it wasn't necessarily intentional, right, to changing the culture. The German Expressionism, very similarly. But the French New Wave, the reason I talk about the French New Wave is because people like Truffaut, right, and others after him were intentionally, very intentionally trying to change the culture through a better understanding of the art form of film. And they did this for decades. They didn't just do it one day and made the 400 blows one day and bam, a new film movement happens. No, that's not how that works. I mean, he wrote for Cahiers du Cinema for like 10 years and then started making films. So this is far more organic and natural of a film movement than just some guy says, I'm going to write a few articles and then make a film. No, that's not what was happening there. So, and then it's not just about how the film movement happened either, or that was intentional either. It's also about the fact that their time was actually very similar to our time. What they were dealing with was actually very similar to what we're dealing with, which is the trauma of war, the trauma of social upheaval, right? And so the social upheaval we've been dealing with is globalism and 2020, the virus of 2020, and the social impact of all these changes. And that kind of globalism and wokeism as a social movement that has affected our art forms and our culture very broadly around the world, right? So in fact, it's almost primarily a governmental and media. So what we have now in the public, in the populace, which has formed populist movements, is a backlash against what's perceived as an establishment film industry, right? Which is exactly what we have now. And it's what they were dealing with then. That establishment film industry was a big Hollywood industry. It's like the remnants of the golden era, right, of Hollywood, the late 20s, uh, 30s, and early 40s, right? I guess throughout the 40s, really. But that golden era of Hollywood was very big establishment, and it was about big cinema, like blockbuster cinema. And it was about glossy, huge stories, mainstream stories, but it was not about the everyman. And it wasn't about benefiting the everyman. It wasn't necessarily the kind of stories that the typical person wanted to see or that influenced their lives, right? And so French New Wave was very specifically about those things, where Italian neorealism was really more about dealing with the trauma of war and the social situations there. Just brilliant cinema, by the way. And German Expressionism was really before the war, right? So, in that sense, it's a complete film movement, right? It's not like after the devastation of war, but it happened before World War II. And so it was, I think you could call it a horror film movement about the decadence of a society, right? In Germany and kind of the darkness that comes with that. The beauty of the cinema is still present in that film movement, even though it's not a backlash film movement. necessarily. And if it is if it is a form of a reaction or backlash, it's a reaction very directly to German society, right? Where the others were more of an industry rehabilitation movement. French New Wave was an attempt to uproot the French cinema and world cinema, hopefully, but to create something that really was very relevant to the normal person, right? So this is something that conservatives in America, this mirrors that same kind of need in society where we need a film movement that speaks for the people. It's not about Hollywood. It has nothing to do with Hollywood, right? The beauty of the French New Wave as it comes to solving this problem is that not only were the social conditions the same, not only were there a group of artists, I think, who want to change their artistic expression in mainstream society, like Truffaut did, and people like him, but the technology was also advancing at that time to make it possible to make feature films for very little money, right? That just didn't exist before then. The war itself made mobile cinema cameras necessary to where filmmakers had to be out on the field and shoot very easily, cheaply, efficiently, with high quality if they could. And this changed cinema, making it possible for the French New Wave to occur. So they were the French New Wave was essentially the precursor of what we need right now. What we need right now is small filmmakers with little DSLR cameras or iPhones going around and shooting stuff, and we have an additional element that they didn't have back then, which is distribution channels. We have far more access to distribution. It's true that it's not at the level of Hollywood, right? And the monetization isn't necessarily there either, right? We can't necessarily monetize very easily or effectively. But if we only have a very small crew, that's not a problem, right? We can also use crowdfunding and fans on the internet to fund these kinds of projects. So with DSLR cameras, with iPhones, with these other cheaper cinema cameras now that we have, we can literally do what Truffaut wanted to do, but even better. All we have to do is have the same ethic that they had. Shoot very efficiently on the street, shoot with or without sound. Sound doesn't matter as much, but we can do it, right? Because we have the technology to do it. They didn't always have sound ability to capture sound then. Do it with very, very small crew. Do it potentially with non-actors, which helps you make a documentary type style, but primarily do the kinds of stories that relate to the everyman, which was a large portion of what they were talking about in the French New Wave. The fact that Hollywood was making things that didn't relate to them in their lives was really important, but also the artistic element. The artistic element of this is extremely important because Hollywood before this was essentially a craft factory, right? A factory for craftsmen, not necessarily artists. It's true that artists are craftsmen, but not all craftsmen are artists, right? Some craftsmen simply construct buildings as instructed, hammer and nails. Other craftsmen become finishing carpenters, right? Or sculptors working with wood who do things that are very creative and inventive and go beyond the scope of what their boss might tell them to do, right? And the reason I bring this up is because the French New Wave and Truffaut and people from Cahiers du Cinema basically invented what's called the Auteur theory. The Auteur theory is about elevating the importance of the director as an artist, not as simply someone taking orders from a producer and following, like getting everything under budget and on time and having factory style work and factory style wages. Cahiers du Cinema was trying to invigorate the idea that film should be an art form and that means a singular vision. And that means the director has to become elevated as an artist. And the beauty of that is quite evident when you look at the work that came from that movement and how they impacted future filmmakers, how they impacted New Hollywood, etc. Very important there. But, film as an art form needs to be realized that these kinds of technology and artistic tools, if they don't reach the pinnacle of what they're meant to be, then they kind of languish down here as a mediocre way of making money or of having fun or of doing something that you value, but it's not necessarily an art. And you're not necessarily making art. You're making money very potentially, but that's just about it. And most filmmakers don't even do that. So the reality is we need to return to the idea of cinema as an art form, the director as an auteur, and not simply as a cog in a wheel, which was really what the golden age of Hollywood did. You were a cog in a wheel and you didn't really have necessarily any reason to do anything outside of what was expected of you to do when making a film. Now, golden age of Hollywood was not against art, but it had to be following the bottom line, understanding that we have to be under budget and all of these things. The factory life was very important as it comes to how to make films efficiently, and unless you could prove that the art you were making was going to pay off later on, these kinds of artists weren't necessarily encouraged. People like John Ford and other directors like him just became good at controlling what they did so that their art shone through in the edit, which they had very little to do with in big Hollywood. So, what they would essentially do was edit it in camera before it's edited. In other words, they provide the best shots, they provide the best story, the only possible story that could come out of the edit when they hand it to the editor. And they knew how to do that, right? But there were many directors who did everything by the book and they provided a great many options for an editor. And then the art doesn't necessarily shine in that system. And it's not necessarily a piece of art in that system. So, what you have now with people like Truffaut and the French New Wave instead is an understanding that in order to really have socially impactful, beautiful work that's worth spending a few francs on, you need to make some art. And in order to make art, that also, by the way, affects society and builds a movement and builds communities, right? This is the really important aspect of that, right? Building culture comes from building communities. So this is what French New Wave was really trying to do. It was trying to build communities and build culture. And it did that by really understanding the art form. And so hundreds of articles in Cahiers du Cinema about this, by the way. And, you know, there is one thing I really respect about the French, and that is that they really do care about this kind of stuff. And so they put an inordinate amount of effort in understanding and communicating about this stuff. So I would listen to that, but understand that these social matters are really of primary importance, which is making the kind of art that can really impact the culture. So making the kinds of stories that are, I think, relevant to the normal man on the street. The fact that we can do it now in a far more effective way, in an even cheaper way, and we have, I think, the kind of people who really want to achieve that, I think are lying dormant in society right now. And I think that they're waiting for the right kind of thing to come along to say, I want to be part of that because this is actually making a difference in society. And a new movement that could do that, a new film movement could do that, right? But it's going to have to be shared online. It's going to have to be distributed enough to where it really affects the public. And so that the kind of subject matter you're going to see in these stories is going to have to be very impactful, right? What is your thought about this kind of stuff so far, honey?
Yeah, the French New Wave is so interesting. I remember the movie Breathless. I really enjoyed that movie.
Hmm.
And so much of it was voiced over later, ADR. So they recorded all the dialogue for the actors later, like in the studio. And so it has, you can kind of tell that's what they're doing. It doesn't always match up, but it creates it in a way, it makes the film seem even more intimate, as if the
Yeah.
characters are just having a conversation in a room together.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's a style that I definitely appreciate a lot. And it was so much about personal, intimate films and stories. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was some kind of underground movement going on right now where
Yeah. And just no one knows
people
about it.
are making movies like this, personal
Hmm.
movies, small movies on their phone, and they're not worrying about, you know, motion graphics and making
Yeah.
look slick and like a Hollywood movie. They're not thinking about that at all. They're just making some nice, real, personal, intimate films
Hmm.
with the auteur theory in mind.
Yeah. there's more modern there are modern directors that have criticized the auteur theory, thinking that it was trying to benefit one person above the crew, cast and crew. But this is just simply not historically accurate. The French New Wave and auteur cinema actually was about benefiting all parties by making a better product. If they the idea was to make a better product and benefit the community with the kind of stories that culture cares about, right? But to do that, you have to have someone in charge making the decisions that are good decisions about the artistry of these products. And that's the auteur, right? The auteur or the author of these pictures needs to be someone that has competency in that role and considers it their duty to exercise their talents as an artist on set. So the other members of the cast and crew, they serve at their behest, understanding that this is the kind of cinema that they want to make because it's good cinema. What it used to be before the auteur theory is that people would see the actors and think that this film a is almost a vehicle. It was almost considered to be a vehicle of the actor because the public would see the actor and the star, but wouldn't necessarily know who the producer or director or cinematographer was. So the actor who has almost the least amount to do with putting this picture together behind the scenes was considered the most important person. So you can see then that returning to the kind of cinema that came before the auteur theory is not an improvement on the auteur theory. You have to make a new theory that's better than the auteur theory, and no such theory exists better than the auteur theory to making quality artistic cinema, right? Now, certainly you can make films in the studio system that make money, but how does this benefit the community? How does this benefit culture if all you're doing is trying to make money, right? So this can't be of primary importance to a film movement. The primary thing in a film movement is to affect the culture. And that means making art that's profound and influential and powerful and relevant to that community, right? So, there's ways of making money and creating films that actually have very little social relevance, right? You just kind of provide popcorn cinema, you provide entertainment value, which is spectacle and is not really socially nuanced or socially profound. It's not dealing with real difficult social issues. It's just about selling popcorn and making money. And so this doesn't really improve the culture. It doesn't necessarily improve your community. So you have to really, I think, work at your higher calling as an artist through the medium of film if you really want to do that kind of thing and make that kind of impact. So that's going to be very necessary. And that means essentially returning to the auteur theory of artists doing new things that you've never seen before, new powerful things that reflect and inspire the community to do better and make new things. So we don't have a better alternative to the auteur theory. The auteur theory really is about allowing cinema to reach the apex of its purpose, which is as an art form. And you can't really do that without an auteur to guide the vision of a film and to be intelligent enough to bring a story to life that is socially effective and affecting, right? So that's going to be necessary. My belief is that you're still going to have different kinds of directors, like you'll have an actor's director, you'll have a visual director who's behind the camera, or you'll have a writer's director who is creating his own kind of story and envisioning it. People like David Mamet, sometimes theater style writers become writers directors. Like Sorkin and David Mamet, they almost do stage plays in front of a camera. That's kind of some of the things that they do. So you're always going to have those different kinds of directors, but they need to have a unique artistic vision and look at what they're trying to do as an art form. And then surely there's going to be people who say, well, we can't compete with Hollywood. We're not going to make the money Hollywood can make. But what people don't realize is that the truth is, if you make this kind of cinema, you might only have to hire 5 people. And so those 5 people don't require a lot of, special needs necessarily and large income. So you might pay people upfront a little bit and then hope for profits in the future. Or you might do a crowdfund and pay for everybody's salary up front and then see what the film does later. There's a lot of things you can do. The fact that we also have the internet to help as it comes to supporting uh, a modicum, at least, of distribution and funding, potentially some kind of funding like crowdfunding, that this is what French New Wave did not have. So they had to go in theaters and they had to go to festivals and build communities in order to make any money at all from these films. And that's what they did. Today, what we could do also is build festivals that support these kinds of films. We can also have virtual festivals online that support these kinds of films. And we could just distribute and crowdfund them in the way that we're doing now with small artists and small creators. The kinds of artists from from filmmakers to writers to game designers to any kind of artist, they can make enough money to support their career through crowdfunding. They just need to learn how to do that, right? So, in other words, this effort to affect culture is very, very possible if we look at the fact that it's been done in the past, it's been successful in the past, it can be successful again. And I think people just need to believe that it's possible, and they need to also find and support those artists that want to do this kind of thing, who have the ambition and the desire and the drive to do this kind of thing. And I would say, get together with these small groups that you find who are doing these things, watch old cinema, watch how they made these kinds of films back in the day. Right? Because many times what they were focused on was innovation. They were focused on having fun together, making a film, and they were focused on the kind of stories that they thought was really cool. They thought was just really relevant and important for people to see. So a lot of the reason I'm talking about this is that what we have right now is these big companies, and I shouldn't say big, they're probably not as big as the companies you see in Hollywood, not nearly as big as those companies. But there are companies right now that call themselves conservative, that call themselves Christian. I'm not saying that they're not, but the problem is that they say they're working towards solving this need in culture, but I don't see any of them talking about things like these film movements and trying to start a new artistic or film movement to affect the culture. Do you see anybody doing that? I don't. And instead, what you'll see is you'll go on social media and you'll see, there might be a few people sharing projects here and there, but this is not whatsoever forming a movement. Then, second of all, and most importantly, most of the things that they talk about is the left wing and the right wing and the fact that we're in this culture war. And what people don't understand is these are all political terms. They have nothing to do with actual culture. And so the left wing, right wing, none of that is about culture. It's about the perception of culture. It's about the perception of we got a point when the other team lost a point. You're getting these little wins in the culture that you think is a real win. I mean, the fact that it's more overt and in public does have a modicum of impact in the culture, but mostly it's false victories and people who think that they've affected the culture, but really they haven't. They haven't necessarily affected the culture at all. They've scratched the surface as it comes to the culture. The truth is, you really need artists and people who know how to build culture to get involved, and then those people need to get together and form a movement. And that movement, if it's not relevant to society, if it's not helpful to the community and to society, it's also not going to make that much of a difference. It's going to be very surface level. Kind of like mumblecore, right? That was a film movement that was happening by maybe 10 years ago. And mumblecore is another movement that I really like. But the truth is, it wasn't really about affecting the culture. It was about making something new that was fun and interesting and cool. So new production techniques being utilized. They would go without scripts, right? And a lot of things would be improvised. And so they'd have to work with certain kinds of actors to improvise. Greta Gerwig was famously a mumblecore actress. And so a lot of American filmmakers and actors were in the mumblecore movement. Some of them are still doing something in the movement, but very little, and it had almost no impact socially. So it was only impactful with like filmophiles, American like people who really enjoyed film and were into like art films and stuff. Know who David Eggers are and all these people who are trying to make more artistic film. It only made a difference with them, but it doesn't necessarily make a difference in the general culture, right? And so the only way to really do that is two different ways. It's to have widespread distribution. That's number one. And number two, it's to provide films about subject matter that are socially very widespread, socially relevant. It can't be like this kind of like astroturf political kind of where you're superimposing your values onto somebody else. No, this has to be relevant with just the general populace, right? And preferably not a left or right wing film. Something it doesn't necessarily have to be right in the middle, like you're just trying to look like you're trying to compromise and you don't have any personal beliefs of your own. No, you can be a little bit leaning a little bit more on one side than the other. But I think that you should approach the story with empathy and understanding that all of us can find something to like in the hero, possibly, or in the story. And those kinds of films really make an impact, I feel. We talked about this a few weeks ago with Rambo, First Blood, back in the 70s. Rambo was a somebody who I think veered a little bit more to the right in the sense that he was military man, was not afraid of violence, and yet he was also against the military, his military bosses who would send him into harm's way without any good reason. And so that made him a little bit more left wing in some ways. So, but really, he's a character that exhibits empathy for both sides, right? For the everyman, it's not like there never was a left winger who was in the Vietnam War, and it's not like there never was a right winger who was a bit of a hippie or opposed the war. So, you know, um, yeah, yeah. So Rambo is just one example of a character that I think both sides of the political aisle can identify with if you're being empathetic, right? And other characters like Dirty Harry, a little bit more right wing, but the filmmakers said that they actually were somewhat left wing. These kinds of films were part of a huge group of films that dealt with crime, waves of crime that the everyman dealt with in the country, and on these geopolitical matters of war, which everybody had to deal with in some way in the America of the 70s. These films made a huge difference in genre filmmaking as well. And genre filmmaking, if you're not aware, our film essentially come from small film movements that help the film industry to make money. Genre filmmaking is all about making money through formulas that are effective and that the film audience wants to see. So, film movements can start this kind of thing and can affect genres immensely, right? Because what they do is they kind of identify and expose the true interests of the public to the industry. And so people will say, well, I didn't know the public was interested in seeing films about this or films about that, right? But this film made a lot of money. So now I know that the public is interested in these kinds of films. And then you'll see more filmmakers trying to make those kinds of films. And that's because they want to make genre films and they want their films to be profitable and to make money. It's not more complicated than that. So the truth is, filmmakers and the film industry needs to understand that, first of all, it's got to be an art form. It can't just be a way of letting the public lead you as an artist and providing whatever, to be an empty vessel and just give the public what they want. That's not really how artists work. Artists understand the public, but they also are making something that's aspirational and relevant to the public. In other words, it's not what the public wants, it's what the public needs, right? So almost a parental role there. An artist is like a prophet. A prophet corrects and warns people and says, you're going in the wrong direction. You need to go in this direction. And that's really what artists should be doing. Artists should not just be following, therefore, artists should not just be following genre conventions. Artists, sure, can often do follow some genre conventions, but they should also be leading in subject and stylistic areas. Artists should lead as it comes to genre and style conventions, not follow. And most importantly, artists should lead as it comes to talking about social issues. And an industry needs to exist that supports not just a group of artists who want to say the same thing over and over again because they've seen that it's successful or that they agree with the messaging of the film. No, that's boring. You're going to get really stagnant, right? As a genre and as an industry, give it like 5 years and you're going to be really stagnant. What you need is artists that challenge you and that make you think about life differently. And we haven't been seeing that in Hollywood for a good 10 years. So nobody's really been challenging the social and the artistic conventions or the genre conventions besides the conservative side of the aisle. Angel has challenged the public, the Daily Wire has challenged the public and challenged Hollywood most of all. And there's a lot of small growing conservative groups like Lore TV, Canon Plus, Blaze TV, Breitbart, and others that are trying to challenge the kind of the mainstream media makers. And so what you're going to need, what those people are going to need now more than ever is artists, not just people who do what they're told and are there to make money. They need artists who are tastemakers and who know what the public needs, not what it wants. And they know what you as a studio head or as a company CEO need and not want. Right. So they're giving you something that you've never seen before and they know you're going to need it. Right. If you want to make a difference and do something new. And it's like one of those things where you don't know you need it until you see it. And you're like, oh wow, I really needed that. And you just don't know what it is until you see it. But the artist's job is to do that, right? It's to surprise you in that way. We don't have a lot of these people right now. I'm even in this business and I don't see that many people doing it. They do exist, and every now and then I talk about them, right? But for the most part, no, I don't see very many of them making a difference. This is why a movement, like a film movement, is so important. Because what a film movement does is it takes what you do have and makes the best of it. And then once that movement is in the public's eye, new artists come out of the woodwork and say, I need to be with those people making that stuff. And so they're not going to be sitting anymore in their living room or playing video games or hanging out just at their job. They're going to be going, I need to go make that thing. I want to get hired on at this company or make a film and join that film movement. Whatever I have to do to be part of that is what I have to do. So that's when it can start to get exciting. And we just need that particular movement to happen. But the truth is, you don't just decide to make a film movement one day. What you do is you have to understand the kind of film movement we need right now. And the only way you can do that is to study the times now and to study how film movements happen, right? And then put the pieces together. What kind of film movement do we need now and why? And is it possible? And the truth is, it's very possible to make what you could call conservative new wave film movement very similar to what the French New Wave was. Very similar in technique, in technology, in the kind of staff you'll need, the staffing requirements, kind of um, in our distribution abilities. And what we really need is those social matters to be addressed. We need to make the kind of films that deal with these social matters that we think are like more relevant and what we're not seeing in Hollywood. So I think that can be very possible, but we really have to focus on that goal. So what does everybody think? Do you think that that's possible? Do you think that I have something there? If you look up the French New Wave and just study it a little bit, you might see a little bit of what I'm talking about. And you might be able to compare it to today. And you might be a little bit shocked to see that actually this is a very similar time. So I don't know. That's what I have for you. I know this is a shorter episode, and a lot of that's because of this Riverside test we're doing. But I hope you enjoy and look up some of this stuff. I think there's a lot of potential, but I really appreciate you guys. And what I tried to do is just provide a glimmer of hope to some people who really care about this. And then I set you off on the next step. If you really want to research it and study it yourself, you're going to have to do that if you're interested in this stuff. I can't do all that for you. I'm trying to do a lot of this stuff, but I really can't take you to the next step. What you have to do is, what like one video I saw recently was, I think it's called Celluloid Cinema. It's a channel on YouTube, and they talk about the French New Wave there a little bit. There's plenty of other places where you can go to look at the French New Wave, but if you know anything about history, like the World War II era and afterwards the post-war era, if you know anything about how Hollywood was constructed at the time and how it changed and formed after that, and then if you compare that to today, it's very similar, very similar. And I think that the French happened to have a really good, well formulated theory about how to fix that problem. And they fixed it. They created a lot of great films after that. And then a European art film movement came after that, which I think really derived from those theories, most of all. Bergman, Tarkovsky, a lot of other great filmmakers formed after that, and, that made the '60s and '70s great, that kind of stuff. And then the new Hollywood in America started taking shape, which I was never that impressed with new Hollywood. What they did is they made it more big business eventually and started bringing blockbusters. That was really a different film movement by that time, and George Lucas and the blockbuster and Spielberg was really a very different kind of movement. I don't have a lot of new other stuff to say about it other than, I mean, if the French could do that back then, we could do that today. And, we could do it in a larger scale as well, with greater impact for distribution, much greater impact. Our quality would be so much better. I mean, you can make a better quality film on an iPhone than you could on those cameras back then. I mean, sure, film is film. Film is beautiful. It's got a lot of grain and lovely picture, but our modern digital cameras have many other abilities that those cameras just did not have. You could shoot low light, for example. You couldn't do that back then at all. You could not do low light shooting. Even though we have digital grain now, the digital grain is kind of charming sometimes when you think about it. We've got great color. You can get very colorful shots. There's so many things we could do now that they could not do back then. And so we probably would need even less crew than they had. I think we're even more socially repressed now than they were then. I think what they were dealing with was, older generation, the silent generation, I guess, that was not dealing well with the war. And their kids kind of didn't like that. And I mentioned Truffaut before in his 400 Blows, that was an autobiographic film in a way of his childhood. And so he was like a little criminal on the streets doing crazy stuff because he just did not relate to the older generation. He wasn't treated well in his own view. And that angst goes into making art, that kind of angst, and you don't think we have that kind of kid right now? I mean, the kids right now that could pick up an iPhone and could make art about their own lives right now, and it would be even better than Truffaut, I think. But, they have to be I do think that they have to think about these theories and have to think about what makes good cinema, what makes cinema work as an art form. And so, yeah, we'll have to talk about that more, but I just want to let all you know that it's very possible, and we're in a similar time, and I think we need something like the French New Wave in our current time, in the West especially. America, Australia, England, Europe, Canada. Like if we had something happening like that right now, it could really, because we're very socially repressed right now. People need to get out and get their voice out there and make something that is offensive to people who are very socially repressed themselves. It offends them, their sensibilities, because they've been told that they shouldn't think or talk about such things. This is what art is for. It's for talking about these things. So instead of going on social media and just being like, "Oh, I'm frustrated," put that frustration into making art. You probably won't get as much pushback by people saying, "No, blah, blah, blah." What a waste of time compared to if you make art, So I would challenge you guys to do that. Make some art with your iPhone. Try to make it into something that really is cinematic or interesting and socially relevant, and contact me. Get in the comments and be like, "I believe in this. I think that if we work together, a social film movement could happen, you know? And we'll work with you to try to make something happen. All right, guys. I know this is like a very different episode, but love you guys. We just need to get out there and do it. Otherwise, that's how the culture crumbles. So, what do you think, Rebecca?
Yeah, I love the topic of the French New Wave and the auteurs. I
Yeah.
agree, we need a new movement.
Yep. So, where can people find you?
You can find me on Substack, Rebecca Croft, and you can also find me on YouTube, Rebecca Loves Jesus. Where can people find
Yep.
more about what you're doing, John?
And I'm on YouTube as well on this channel. I'm on mediamoses.com and on X. And check out what we're doing. And we love you guys. Have a great weekend. And give a salute to the culture builder who's making a difference, trying to make French New Wave films with their iPhone. Love you guys. Have a great weekend.
I salute you, John.
Thank you.
You're building culture and you're making a difference.
We're trying. Love you guys. Have a great weekend. Bye.